Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we are striving now to set up the financial instruments also in Slovenia, and before I begin, I would really like to say that it is a privilege to stand here. So thank you for the invitation. I will go very brief through my presentation. Slovenian program is worth 1.1 billion euro of public contribution, and we've foreseen financial instruments under 3 sub-measures. The first one is dealing with investments into the processing of agricultural products. The second one is dealing with investments into developing of non-agricultural activities. And the third one deals with the support for the processing of wood. So I really must stress that we have no so far experience with the implementation of financial instruments under the Rural Development Program, so it is quite a challenge to set it up now. So I'm not here to explain you what are the main goals of the measures, but just to stress with this slide that there is a great variety of beneficiaries that will be our potential beneficiaries for financial instruments. Here we are not talking just about the food processing industry. Here we are talking about very small-sized farms, physical persons who have established supplementary activity on the farm. So here it will be also for the banks, which currently have not all experience in dealing with such small farmers. It will be quite a challenge to establish a financial product that will cover all the needs. So from the small ones to the large industry, because here we will also support large companies. We've foreseen roughly 65 million euro of public contribution to financial instruments. As you can see, this is quite an ambitious jump from the grant-dependent system into the financial instruments in Slovenia. And I must say that in 2014, when we decided to launch financial instruments, it was still a time of the financial crisis. Our banking sector was in difficulties. The agricultural companies really had difficulties in accessing the loans. If they were granted the loan was highly secured, and it was also the interest rates that were really high and unfavorable for our farmers. So this is the reason why, and also the diminishing of funds between the programming periods, that was also the reason why we decided to set up financial instruments in Slovenia. In the next slides, I will go roughly through the main key findings of our ex-ante assessment. I will go very brief through these slides because I think that a lot of this was already said by Estonian colleagues, Italian colleagues, so our situation is quite the same. So in the agricultural sector, it is really highly ground-dependent sector. And we too had difficulties, or will have difficulties in the future, to persuade our farmers that financial products are the good option. Most frequently, the funding was dedicated to acquire machinery or equipment. And as already said, the main reasons behind the difficulties of our companies to access finance was the cost of obtaining finance and the financial situation of the company. So banks were not really willing to finance them. And that's why the companies in the previous programming period had difficulties in closing the financial structure also for the grant part. In comparison to the entire population of companies in Slovenia, the agricultural ones are really more leaning on grants. And here, this is only a graphical summary of what I've already said. So besides the public grant, it was the short-term loans that were mostly used by agricultural companies in Slovenia. And the second one, slide is also saying that the majority of the investments were for the machinery and equipment. I will skip this slide because I already explained it. So, according to our gap analysis, SMEs in agriculture in Slovenia would mostly need, first of all, short-term loans to compensate their exhausted and limited self-financing capacities, to cover their cash flow needs, to cover their working capital needs. And also, besides that, long-term financing, such as long-term loans with reduced financing costs, support to secure collaterals through guarantee instruments for long-term financing, and support for export. In parallel, current grant programs are estimated to be still needed in the agricultural sector. Concerning working capital needs, SMEs may need short-term debt financing and perhaps microfinance as well. So the instrument that was proposed as the most proper for our fund is the guarantees. The expected leverage estimated is from 1.5 to 4. Currently, as we are already preparing the term sheets for the financial instruments, our future fund of funds took very rigorous estimations. So they estimated that the leverage will be somehow to 1.5 in this sector. So the expected amount available will range from 130 million to 350 million euro. The target group, it is recommended by the gap analysis to leave it very broad one. So, as already explained, from physical persons to large enterprises. And objectives of the instrument is mainly to reduce the risks taken by a financial institution when lending such a company which has lower rating than to encourage SMEs and large companies to use financial instruments alongside with the grants to cover credit risk of the financial intermediaries, to reduce the difficulties to access the loan, and to support working capital. What are the main advantages? I think these are very clear. So the reduction in the maximum level of collateral that is now required by the banks, to reduce the interest rate that is now required for the loan, to allow the guarantee costs to be below the market, and a possibility for a grace period that is longer than the one usually applied by financial intermediary market. The proposed structure in our case is to have one fund of fund for all EC funds, but with a separate funding agreement, one for the cohesion funds and the other one for the agricultural funds. So we are working separately in drafting the funding agreement. Where are we now? So we conducted the ex-ante assessment. It was finished in November 2015. We required a review of the ex-ante assessment, and that was done by the EIB in September 2016. In November, we held a very productive video conference with EIB and European Commission. And in February this year, we had targeted coaching, as it will be explained also in the following presentations. And here, I must really thank the EIB and the European Commission, because this coaching was really, really useful, productive for us, and we were really grateful to both institutions for that. From that period on, as now we are going deeper and deeper into the structuring the financial instrument, we've opened a lot of questions on the interpretation of the EU legislation rules, and here we are a heavy or intensive exchange of questions, and also the answers between the Slovenian Managing Authority and European Commission is taking place, and also for that, many thanks. Several meetings are taking place now with the fund of fund manager, the paying agency, and so on. And most importantly, in June, the government adopted a decision that our National Development Bank fulfills the requirements for the in-house for an in-house award. So now we can finally launch this procedure of nomination. So the key issues, I will go very briefly. I will not read all that is in the slides, but just to mention it. Selection of a fund is not an easy thing to assess their capabilities according to the 480 regulation. Article 7 is also a challenge because we working at the ministry have perhaps not enough competence to assess whether a bank, national bank, fulfills all the criteria, and here we will seek external advice on this issue. Also, this criteria may leave certain space for subjective assessment, and in the absence of very clear criteria, it is a challenge, certainly. And here we really don't want to make any mistake, because if we want to have this nomination done correctly according to EU law. Another thing, very important, is also the control and audit. It was already mentioned by Mr. Pilke that these issues are being closely looked at. Here, under in the agricultural fund, the paying agency really has a specific place. It is accredited institution. It has to follow certain rules. And here we sometimes feel that there is certain space between the legal provisions that are common for all funds and then fund-specific rules on controls and audit. Here we have quite intensive debate with our paying agencies as to who will control who. The bank is certainly not very happy to have paying agency there and auditing everything, checking everything, also going to the ground. So here we have to strike a certain compromise between the both institutions in order not to make these financial instruments so complicated, so burdensome that no one in Slovenia will apply for it. This is our main concern. To go on, in order to increase the attractiveness of a financial instrument, we decided to go for blending, for a combination on the level of the same project, same eligible costs. Here also are certain open issues, and also, for example, who does what in case there is a default, if there is an irregularity found, if the stable is not there, who takes back what, and so on. So a lot of issues from the state aid, from the duplication of controls, from the duplication of documentation. These are all the things that we really want to be careful about in order to make it as flexible as possible and attractive to our farmers. The last thing that we opened it also is the structure of the financial product. Here we really, there was a recommendation from the gap analysis to cover the working capital as well. There is a question of whether or not we can finance used equipment from the financial instrument, and so on. So I will not go there, perhaps just to mention the financial flows. Here we are, let's say, we've opened a question with our Ministry of Finance how these transactions between the paying agency and our national bank will influence our balance of payments accounts, where will this transfer increase our public debt, and so on. So these are all very critical issues for us. And our strategic concerns, will the farmers see advantages, will they use it, and so on. I'm coming to the last part of my presentation, and that is, in this slide, I try to graphically show how this flow between, in case of blending, will go. Let me firstly stress that we will have two separate operations, one that will be purely a financial instrument, But on the following 2 slides, I will show you how we structured the blending, so the combination. In our case, we were really thinking of how to construct such a system that the grant system, the grant part, will not in any way compete with financial instruments. This is why we will say from the 2018 on, farmers, you can access grant upon the condition, just upon the condition that you will also opt for a financial product. Otherwise, if we have 2 separate schemes at the same time, no one will apply for the financial product. At least this was our concern, perhaps unfounded, but this is how we were thinking. So we are striving to make financial instruments so attractive that no one will opt for a grant at all. This is our main target, but because we know that the grant, everything that you receive and you get it, and you don't have to pay back, is also an attractive option. We will try to combine it in such a way that farmer will not be really suffocated with the documentation that will be sent to the paying agency, to the national bank, and so on. Here I already explained how this blending will go on. So first of all, the farmer will go to the financial intermediary. He will be given a letter of the bank saying, yes, I'm prepared to credit you, to give you a loan. And then he will go to the paying agency. Paying agency will check this eligibility condition, say, okay, I will award you a grant. And with this grant, upon this grant, the bank will approve him a loan. That's it. And he will close the financial structure. I'm coming to the last slide. So currently in the summer, it will be a busy summer, we will try to finish finally this nomination of the National Bank. We will invite the bank to provide all the documentation so that we can assess whether or not this national bank fulfills all the criteria set by the EU regulation. And we will invite the bank to provide investment strategy and the business plan. All that is part of the funding agreement that will be drafted in the autumn. And also, we have to prepare a national decree on FIs. And the last thing, I hope that in the beginning of the next year, we will be able to send the RDP modification to the European Commission for an approval so that in 2018, it will be the year for us, hopefully a launch of a successful story in Slovenia on financial instruments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.